Today on the show, we're talking about the impact of policy on school culture and why you may want to get rid of one policy as it actually increases liability for your school. I'll see you there.
Want to know how to really improve school culture? Hey, I'm your host, Jeff Veely, and this is the Campus Peace Podcast. Join me after school as we discuss how to empower students, boost staff morale, and squash squabbles.
Well, thanks for joining me after school. We are 75% of the way through this series, the 4 pillars of campus culture. We've talked about people, programs. Next week, we're going to talk about process. Today, though, talking about school policy. And I'm going to be honest and upfront with you. This may be a little bit more of a soapbox sounding episode than others. And that's because I see schools in my work all the time as an education consultant and youth speaker that have some issues with school policy. In other words, their policy is actually contributing to the wrong kind of culture that they want to see. And so often I see policy really in the middle. It becomes sort of this contention point between staff and parents. And you see a lot of great people who want the best for their kids fighting over, well, one piece of paper, one line in the student handbook. And I wish it wasn't that way. And today I want to give you some tips on how you can change school policy or craft school policy that actually, well, brings about what we want: education, the betterment of our kids, that is positive sounding instead of that negative list of, well, do's and don'ts that we often see when we look through the handbook or our student code of conduct. Policy is important. As my mentor, World Peace Ambassador Dr. Clyde Rivers says, policy creates culture. He's been a part of crafting policy on Capitol Hill and working with the United Nations, figuring out how can we have policies that we can all agree on and things like human rights. You know, when we think of our schools, we want to build golden rule schools. That's, after all, what this show is all about. Teaching you how to build schools where people treat others the way they want to be treated. And the problem I have with school policy, and maybe you found this as well, is sometimes it just feels so rigid. Sometimes there's this really rigid line where maybe there should be a little bit more of a gray area. Maybe there should be a little bit more discernment. And one of the problems I have with school culture, or school policy rather, is that often schools make promises that they can't keep. That's the big thing I want to address on today's show. Is it possible that your school has a policy that actually increases liability for your district? Is it possible to have a policy that now is working for you, but it's actually working against you in the culture, the environment that you're trying to create? You know, I see this so often, and I can't speak on policy from every angle. Honestly, I'm not qualified to have that conversation. But there is one area of expertise that I can speak on because for 10 years I've been seeing it often done the wrong way. And that's anti-bullying policies. I'm talking about policies around social aggression, around conflict. Now, the Department of Education over 5 years ago came out at the federal level here in the United States, and they said, look, we've learned from our research, we've learned from experience that anti-bullying policies are bad. They actually make social aggression worse. They increase hostility on campus. They pin parents against staff members and put kids in the middle of this tug of war. They actually decrease the likelihood that kids will report serious incidents because typically the consequence doesn't match the crime. And by the way, it's usually not a crime. It's 2 kids squabbling and having some sort of disagreement or some sort of power imbalance. And so the Department of Education at the federal level, again, over 5 years ago, came out, they did a press conference, and they said, look, we want to encourage you schools to get rid of your anti-bullying policies. They're making things worse. Now, I'm specifically talking about zero tolerance policies. But even if you take the word anti-bully, and I broke this down before, you take the word bully, it's got over 5 definitions today in the English language, and some of them contradict each other. There's a legal definition, there's an academic definition, there's a psychological definition, and then that legal definition, every time you go to a different state, sort of changes its meaning. Different states have different laws. And so when parents hear the word bullying, when kids hear the word bullying, when educators hear the word bullying, they define it in their own way. You're not talking about what it means to the school. You're not talking about what it means to the state, wherever you're located. You're speaking to that person, their past experiences, their past encounters, their past trauma, and that's how they're defining it in their mind. And often this emotionally charged word, which by the way, I believe is the most unhelpful word in education today, bullying. This abstract word takes us down a really difficult path. And since we haven't clearly defined the problem, it's difficult to find a clear solution. And so for the last 10 years, I've helped over 1 million students and thousands of schools find a clear solution to this issue that the world calls bullying, that I call social aggression. But even though I've seen people change, even though I've seen programs change, a lot of times I don't see policy change. And when schools say, hey, Jeff, what can we do to make this really a part of everything that we're doing? What can we do to really have this be a comprehensive effort? I said, well, if you're serious about it, if you're serious about equipping kids with peacemaking strategies, and social and emotional learning, and building their emotional resilience, let's put it in our school policy. Now, of course, there's a process to do that. It doesn't happen overnight. But a lot of schools actually don't take me up on that. And here's the problem. Zero tolerance policies say, hey, we have no tolerance for intolerance. That right there is an interesting start, right? We do not tolerate intolerance. Well, you're intolerant. That's weird. But that's what it says. And here's how a parent reads this in the student code of conduct, right? Or in the handbook, whatever that document is that everybody looks at right before orientation, right? You hope they read it. And parents read that and they say, my kid will not have to experience pain or conflict at this school. That's how they read it. Conflict will not happen here. And if it happens, it'll be nipped in the bud. It will be solved peacefully and everyone will walk away singing Kumbaya. That's often how we read it. I remember being 14 years old, going into the principal's office with my dad. And I had kids calling me names and pushing and shoving me, yes. But I also had a kid who was a suspected gang member that was making very serious threats. I also had a guy who was over 6 foot in 11th grade, and he decided he was going to beat me up in the back of my algebra classroom one day. My teacher turned his back, didn't say anything, so here we are in the principal's office to handle this, and I remember my dad pulling out the handbook, looking at the principal and saying, hey, you got a no bullying policy. You've got a no pushing and shoving policy here. This is assault and battery. My son has black and blue marks on his arm. And I'll never forget the principal's response. She looked at my dad and she said, sir, she said, I dealt with students today that tried to bring guns and knives to school. I don't have time to deal with little name calling and pushing and shoving. I've got bigger fish to fry. And I remember myself at 14 leaning forward in the chair in her office and having a little moment of boldness. And I said, ma'am, when we don't take care of the little problems become big problems. Now, I stand by what I said, and I was trying to be respectful. But I could see that all throughout that school. They had policies to keep kids safe. They had policies that were supposed to, do something if something happened to someone to help kids feel comfortable at school, to feel safe. That's part of what we need, by the way, is to feel safe in order to learn. We all know that. And this principal said, well, it isn't a big deal unless it's a gun or a knife. I got bigger fish to fry. Now, that principal that was there for a while, and ironically, a few years after I left, she was actually beat up outside on school grounds by this squabble that had been brewing between students. And as I looked into it, no one had taken the time to solve it, and it blew up to a brawl that the principal got in the middle of, and she actually got injured. And I felt bad about it. But at the same time, I thought, you know what? I wonder if this was a little problem that could have been solved further upstream. I wonder if they would have followed the school policy, if this would have been changed. When it comes to conflict, we've got to take criminal behavior seriously. If someone's assaulted, if someone's battered, that's a crime. Crimes deserve to be punished. I always teach students, if someone hurts your body, they take or break your stuff, that's a crime. Tell an adult, that person deserves to be punished. And if you don't feel like the adult is listening to you that you tell, well, then you go home and you tell mom and dad. You tell grandma and grandpa. You tell your counselor. You tell the police. It's important that you are safe. Crimes deserve to be punished. But what if it's a simple squabble? What if it's two kids not getting along as they exchange classes? What if it's not assault and battery, but it's, pushing, shoving, and poking? Those little annoying behaviors that are meant to drive you nuts. They're not going to send you to the hospital. They're meant to drive you nuts. How do we handle those things? That's what a lot of people call bullying, but I like to call squabbles. My colleagues and I have made a whole program about it. You can go to jeffveely.com/squabbles and learn all about it. Here's a problem. Many schools are finding themselves in lawsuits because parents hear a promise that their kid will never have to encounter conflict. And as a result, when conflict happens, even if it doesn't meet the state definition, the legal definition of bullying, parents march into the office and they say, "You said." The problem is when you make a promise that you can't keep, well, you're sort of liable for the consequences. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an attorney. This isn't legal advice. I can just tell you that from 10 years and 1 million kids sharing this message, some of the things I've seen. When there's lawsuits, I get phone calls from parents and I get very confidential phone calls from schools. And they say, "Jeff, you deal with this. What do you advise?" And I say, "Well, what's your policy?" And sometimes I go, "Ooh, you're going to have to do some cleanup work. You're going to have to do some cleanup work." But our attorney says, yeah, but you sort of promised the parent utopia. You promised the kid utopia, that they weren't going to have conflict. That's what it sounds like. And I know it's just name calling, but you use this abstract word and now you guys got to figure it out. And hopefully everybody has, good money for attorneys. And hopefully you can solve it out. And hopefully there's a voice of wisdom along the way that helps you realize that this is a squabble that could have been solved so much more easily. I wrote something called the peaceable school approach to aggression. And I encourage schools that work with me to take their existing zero tolerance policy or anti-bullying policy. Obviously, you have to have a bullying policy, right? I'm not saying get rid of it completely. But I say let's reword it in a way that is true to who we are. As educators, shouldn't we view conflict? Shouldn't we view relational struggles as an opportunity to learn? Shouldn't it be an educational opportunity? If you think about it, conflicts are like tests, right? I hated algebra tests, but guess what? I had to go through that in order to learn what I was not learning well. I had to get tested so I knew how to improve my skills. And the same thing happens. It's not just reading, writing, and arithmetic. We also need to worry about relationships when it comes to education. That's why I love social and emotional learning. That's why I love resilience education. We're teaching kids the skills so that when a conflict comes along, boom, they know what to do. They know what to do. Here's the peaceable school approach to aggression. I won't read the whole thing, but here's the opening line. Dear parents, it is our aim to minimize conflict and promote the safety of students. As the school administration, we believe that the following approach to aggression is the best interest of our students' well-being and campus culture. It is based on ancient wisdom, moral philosophies, and research-based psychological principles for responding to aggression and resolving relational conflicts. We look forward to partnering with you in teaching your child how to appropriately handle conflicts while promoting peace at school, at home, and in the community. Through our united efforts, we can raise young citizens to be great leaders. Thank you for joining us as we work together to build a safe, productive, and peaceful educational environment. Sincerely, the school administration. Now, listen to that for a second. We've invited parents to partner with us. We've said, hey, we realize that things aren't going to be perfect, but our job is to educate your kid how to handle conflict. That's our role. We're not here to solve every problem for them. We're not promising that they're not going to have relational struggles. No. We're going to say, hey, we're here to educate you. That's what we do well. So let us do what we do well. We're going to teach your kid how to handle these things. We're going to build up their skills. And we see ourselves as not the ones that are solely responsible for this. We are a partner with you. We want to be united in these efforts. And guess what? When one of our schools sends home materials after they've shared this with parents, parents are expecting that they're part of this solution. They expect to be part of the conflict resolution process. Why? Because we've teed that up at the beginning of the year. Hey, remember when we talked about how we handle conflict? sounds like your kid is struggling in this area. We really want to educate them. That's my job as a teacher, is really to teach your kid how to navigate this. I could try to solve it for them, as you've suggested, but that'd be almost like me trying to take their math test. It's sort of cheating. In the long term, it's not going to help your kid. The reality is I'm not going to be there next year when they move on to the next grade. Neither of us can go to college with them, and so I want to make sure they know how to solve conflicts. I want to make sure they know how to deal with a jerk, what to say, how to manage their feelings. It's important to me. So here's a resource. I've been sharing this in my classroom, and I hope you'll watch this video with your child at home. I think it'll really give them some ideas so they don't freeze or feel like they have to run away next time someone's mean. They know exactly what to say. And oh my gosh, imagine the look on their aggressor's face when they try to be mean and it doesn't even faze your kid. I love watching those moments when kids get it, and I know you will too. You're going to be so proud, Mom, Dad. Share that video and let's check in a week and see how it's going. You see that? We've just empowered those parents. We've just empowered that student with a resource. But it all comes back to our policy and our philosophy that we don't solve problems for kids. We equip you and educate you to solve problems. This peaceable school approach goes on. The next segment is a logical view of aggression and conflict. To sum it up, it basically says, look, conflict happens everywhere. It happens at your workplace. It happens in your neighborhood. It happens at maybe your church down the road, your child's little league team. And so we can't promise you conflict won't happen here. We're not going to make a promise we can't keep, but we will promise you this. We're going to have prevention, intervention, and response resources at the ready. Our staff is going to use them, and we're going to have them available for parents and kids as well. And here's how to access that information. And we're putting that out front at the beginning of the year and saying we want to partner with you parents. Next, this approach to aggression talks about discerning types of aggression. It says, it starts out by saying this: the word bullying is a confusing term to discuss aggression. It's often misunderstood, misused, and the definition is ever changing. While our school abides by anti-bullying laws, we are also committed to using clear language to describe specific behaviors so that we might better communicate with one another and find practical solutions to any problems that exist. And it says from there, when your kid has a problem, let's not call it bullying. We understand that that's maybe the category, but we want to know specifically what happened so we can provide help as soon as possible. And then it goes into an overview of your school's efforts, talking about the programs and the people that you can reach out to if your kid's having a problem with aggression or relational conflict. And then it talks about how you handle social aggression by helping support and provide resources, how you handle physical aggression when it crosses the line into a crime. And then it talks about discipline for aggressive behavior, what parents can expect. And it ends, here's my favorite part about this whole thing, the peaceable school approach to social aggression ends by saying this: if we had to sum up our school rules in one, it would be the golden rule. We want to build a campus where students treat others the way they want to be treated, where staff treat others the way that they want to be treated, where parents treat others the way they want to be treated. It's called the One Rule Classroom. And if you Google Golden Rule, you'll find people all over the globe that have just one rule for their classroom or for their school. Their one rule is the Golden Rule. It's beautiful for redirection. You look at a kid and say, is that the way you would want to be treated? Isn't that a powerful thing? Friends, when it comes to policy and how it impacts campus culture, I hope you'll remember this. Policy creates culture. Don't make promises that you can't keep. And make sure, instead of just writing a legal list of do's and don'ts, that you focus on how you're going to empower kids through education. Bring in your school psychologist. Bring in the school social worker when you write your policy. You need more than just an attorney at the table. Why? Because we're educators. That's what we do best. And let's talk about how we can better empower kids. You're not just trying to build great students. You're trying to raise great leaders and great citizens that will transform your community. I'm Jeff Veely. Next week, we are going to be right back here talking about how you can build a process that helps empower students across the board. I'll see you then.
If you enjoyed today's show, please help me achieve an A+. Simply take a moment to rate and review the show wherever you're listening. Then catch up on episodes and grab some free resources over at campuspeacepodcast.com.